Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes, just giving a few minutes for other people to log in.
Something in the air about retirement planning, but in all seriousness, we know that the past really 12 months or 15 months have been very challenging for all of our educator clients, especially those in administration, with navigating the ups and downs and everything of what we've been going through, and certainly adding in the layers of the family impact and virtual learning and everything there. We certainly appreciate everything and all the sacrifices that the administrators have made over the course of the last year or so. Now, with that being said, just like Annika mentioned, so today we're going to be talking about preparing for the future and planning around the pension benefits that you have through New York State. So just to go through a quick overview here, really to go through the pension benefits and how those ultimately work, the retirement income sources, and starting to look at how to plan around what to expect in the future, and then talk about next steps and how we've been able to help a lot of our administrator clients and now retired administrators prepare for that financial future, and again, make sure that everything is working the right way and complementing each other based on what's currently in the financial household. So with that being said, again, we'll start with the overview of the New York State pension. And with New York State, the pension benefits that you're entitled to are truly one of the best funded pension programs in the US. There's a lot of concern, there's a lot of talk about the funding capabilities and how those benefits will work. But again, New York State does have a very, very strong pension system. The other big benefit here is that it is guaranteed lifetime income. Now, guaranteed in quotation marks, because unfortunately anything can be taken away at any point. But for all intents and purposes, this is an income source that you can rely on and that you can reasonably expect over time. For most of our clients that are retirees from the New York State TRS or ERS system, that's also where the pension benefits that you're entitled to are typically the largest source of retirement income. If we were to take somebody who is eligible for $52,000 a year of a pension benefit and multiply that by a 30-year retirement period, that would equal over $1.5 million that's collected from New York State. So it's certainly something we want to make sure that you're maximizing your benefits, you're getting everything that you're entitled to, and also making sure that spouses and loved ones are also taken care of along the way. The final point that I'll make on the pension benefits here is really one of the biggest components is that because you're not relying on investments or something that can vary for all of your retirement income, it provides a great deal of consistency, stability, and peace of mind in the overall context of retirement planning. So it is a very, very big benefit that, again, we want to make sure all of our administrator clients are fully aware and taking advantage of how that actually works. So with that being said, the three pension factors that go into your pension calculation, we're going to go through those today. And for all intents and purposes, again, we're going to keep this on tier 4. There are some variations with tier 5 and tier 6, but we know that the majority of our administrators approaching retirement today are going to fall under potentially tier 3 or tier 4. But again, either one of those tiers, 3 or 4, are going to include the same pension benefits there. So the first pension factor that goes into that calculation is your age at retirement. And New York State says that there's a few different milestones. So the first milestone is reaching age 55 with at least 30 years of service within the New York State system. That's a very, very big milestone because unfortunately, if you retire at age 55 with less than 30 years of service, there are potentially penalties there for not meeting that milestone. So if you're not going to reach 30 years of service with New York State, the next benchmark should be age 62. So if you retire at age 62 with less than 30 years of service, there is no longer any penalty for what's considered an early retirement. So it's certainly something we want to make sure that our administrator clients are aware of, and that it's something that can be planned around. We know that, again, certainly the last year has been challenging, where it's made a lot of people reconsider their retirement expectations, but knowing where you fall on that spectrum and when those milestones are going to be met is certainly something that we want to keep in mind. The second pension factor are your total years of service. And so for those years of service, if you were to retire with less than 20 years, you would get 1.66% times your years of service as that pension factor. So somebody retiring with 15 years of service would be eligible for about 24.9% as a pension benefit for the remainder of their life. Between 20 and 30 years, that factor goes up to 2%. So now for each year of service, you get 2% credited towards your future pension benefit. So again, 25 years of service means that 50% of that total income at retirement would then be replaced by the pension system. With more than 30 years, this is a big question that we get. If I stay beyond 30 years, I'm actually losing pension benefits. That's not entirely true. So with 30 years of service, you get that same 2%, and beyond 30 years of service, you don't accumulate as much as quickly. All right, so that 1 year of service beyond year 30, instead of continuing to get a 2% credit, that credit goes down to 1.5%. So somebody with 35 years of service at retirement is still going to have a higher pension benefit than somebody with 30 years of service. All right, but the pension benefit, again, won't accumulate as fast for years 30 plus as it did for the first 30 years of service there. All right, so the third pension factor that goes into this calculation is referred to as your final average salary. So the final average salary is not necessarily the last 3 years of working. It's the 3 highest consecutive years. All right. So what New York State will look at is, if we have, for the example here, year 28, an $87,000 income, year 29, that income went up to 91. And then year 30, our last year of working, we went to 93,000. Our average salary of those 3 highest years would be $90,333. That is what your pension percentage is based on, that final average salary. There's a little known fact, though, that we have to be aware of in planning for the retirement benefits you're entitled to, that any year used in that final average salary calculation can't be more than 10% of any other year. So New York State has caught on over time that some people have figured out a way to game the system, where they try to pad their numbers, their income numbers, for the last couple of years of working. So if, again, we go back to this scenario where the income goes from 87 to 91, in the year 30, someone says, well, I'm going to do every single thing that I can to increase my pension benefit, and their income goes to 99,000, New York State will eliminate that final year, and they will go back to the next year that falls within that 10% restriction. All right. So where somebody may think that they are actually benefiting themselves by increasing their income, they could be detracting from that final average salary. And New York State will, again, use a lower figure in that calculation. So again, something to be aware of as we're getting closer to that stage of those 3 years of final average salary there. Now, with survivor benefits, all right, this is a very, very big topic of conversation, because we know that a lot of our educators and a lot of our administrators are in dual income households where somebody else may be relying on this future pension benefit. So the way that the benefits work and the options work with New York State, there's a single life option, which does not include a survivor benefit. All right, so what that means is, if we elect that single life option, the highest possible pension benefit that you're entitled to, if something were to happen to that New York State educator, their beneficiary would not receive any pension benefit. So for, again, a lot of our client situations that are dual income and dual retirement households may not be a viable option there. So New York State offers a number of different variances to that. The joint allowance option, so it's a reduced benefit for the life of that New York State educator and or their beneficiary. So basically, as long as one person in that household is still living, that income would go from the eligible amount of 60,000 to 52,956. Now, as long as one of those two individuals were living, that pension benefit would continue for the household. All right, but you can see that you're potentially giving up a pretty significant annual income. So to give up a little bit less in annual income while that New York State pensioner is alive, you can take a reduction, all right, in how much will be left to a beneficiary. So instead of giving up 7,000 a year, if we give up about 6,000 a year, if something happens to that New York State pensioner, the beneficiary would receive 75% of that benefit. All right, we can keep working our way down here. So the less you give up while you're living, the less a beneficiary would be entitled to in the future. All right, there's also what's referred to as a pop-up option. And the pop-up option with New York State is a reduced benefit while both the New York State pensioner and the beneficiary are alive. If the New York State educator passes away, the beneficiary would continue in this case to receive that percentage. So the full benefit here, they would receive that same pension that the administrator was collecting. So that 52,380 would continue to a beneficiary. Again, we work right down the list here. The less we give up during those retirement years, the less that a beneficiary would continue in the event of a premature passing. Now, the difference with the pop-up option here is that in the event that a beneficiary passes away, the New York State administrator would pop up from that $52,000 number back to their single life eligible amount. All right, so it is something to consider and know how it works, but those are some of the options and some of the structure of what New York State will ultimately give you the ability to choose from. So a lot of times we see that it's human nature to look at this $60,000 number and assume that that's going to be the annual income throughout retirement. But having this discussion and looking at those survivor benefits, this is where we want to make sure that we are actually using the appropriate income figures to predict what the future income is going to be over time. So as great of a system as New York State's pension is, there are some challenges. So the first challenge is that it's an inflexible system after 30 days of retirement. So you have to make a lifelong choice, and you have 30 days after your date of retirement to go back and change it. After 30 days, you cannot change anything. You cannot change your option. You can't change beneficiaries. Nothing can be altered. So regardless of financial changes or marital changes, family changes, anything that may happen over time, that is a locked-in decision. So again, proper planning ahead of time before we get to that point can help make sure that we are making the most appropriate decision based on the financial needs of that household. There's also a very, very low cost of living increase. Now, some administrators think that there is no cost of living increase. There actually is, but we know that more so administrators believe that there's a normal cost of living that keeps up with inflation and everything around us. The bare minimum, once somebody is eligible for the cost of living increase, which can be anywhere from 5 to even 10 years into retirement, the minimum cost of living increase, once you're eligible, is $15 per month per year. The absolute maximum increase is $45 per month per year. So this is not going to be a income replacement as the expenses of everything around us in retirement go up year over year. The pension, unfortunately, will not keep pace with the cost of living of again, all those expenses and lifestyle needs that we have around us. All right, another challenge is that taking the survivor benefit option can be a permanent reduction of anywhere from 10 to even 20% from the lifetime income. So again, we know that we need to prepare for having that spousal benefit and that beneficiary income replacement. But again, it is a permanent reduction that can't be changed after 30 days of retirement. Again, a little known fact, and unfortunately, if a New York State educator passes away before they reach retirement eligibility, there is no pension benefit. There is no pension that will continue to a spouse regardless of years of service unless somebody is actually retired with the New York State pension system at the time that they pass away. So it is something, again, to prepare for and just make sure that we are protected regardless of what happens as we approach that retirement age. Again, there's also a permanent reduction if TRS age and years of service milestones are not met. So this is something, again, we have to be aware of. It's something that we educate a lot of our administrator clients on, just to make sure that, again, we're using the most accurate income projections for when that time comes. So if somebody were to retire at age 55 with 29 years of service, their pension benefit would be reduced by almost 30%. All right, that is a huge, huge hit to long-term income replacement, right? As you get closer to age 62, that's where the reductions go down a bit, all right? But we also have to make sure that, again, you are maximizing what you're entitled to. And again, we're not setting ourselves up for a drastically reduced pension benefit relative to where you are during the income years. So just to go through that a bit more and put some numbers behind it, where we look at those pension benefits a lot of times, if we look at the comparison between reaching that 30-year milestone, somebody retiring with $100,000 final average salary with 30 years of service would be entitled to $60,000 a year. If we have the same years of service, the same age, but we don't reach the years of service requirement, let's say somebody retires with 25 years of service instead of 30, they would only get $44,000 when they could have been eligible for 60, all right, with a few more years of service and a few more years on the age. This is a very, very challenging thing to overcome in terms of retirement planning, to try and replace $16,000 a year of lost income. So again, there are planning techniques to make sure that whatever the parameters are and whatever the expectations and income needs are, that this can be, again, planned for and make sure that your benefits are maximized. All right, so with that reduction there, just to put a cost on that, with 30 years of retirement, if we elected that pop-up option, that means that we would collect, again, that $1.5 million of retirement income. If we retired with less than the 30 years and without reaching that age 62 milestone, that total income would go down to about 1.1 million. So that's a $419,000 decision to retire without reaching those two milestones. Certainly don't want to instill fear in anybody or say that you can't retire, but again, it is one of those planning techniques to make sure that as time goes on, you are maximizing what you are entitled to. All right. One final thought, all right, in regards to the pension planning, is that the survivorship calculations are based on a beneficiary's date of birth. Now, with these different beneficiary options, you can only choose one beneficiary. So if you do have children that you'd like to make sure were going to receive that pension benefit in the event of a premature passing, that will drastically impact the eligible amount of how much income you would receive from New York State each year. The larger the gap in the date of birth, the larger the difference with what a beneficiary would be entitled to. What TRS is ultimately doing is they're buying life insurance on you in order to provide that income replacement to whoever your beneficiary might be. So again, if we look at the single life to the joint allowance, New York State's essentially buying a $7,000 life insurance policy on you to make sure in the event that something were to happen, they have assets and resources to continue paying out that income benefit to your beneficiary. All right. Now, the insurance cost here is whatever the reduction in the pension benefit is. All right. So again, that's $7,600 per year in that single life to pop up example. So instead of allowing New York State to buy that life insurance, what if you were to purchase life insurance on your own and take that single life option? There are ways to do that where instead of, again, leaving that decision up to New York State, educators and administrators can buy a life insurance policy, for example, $5,000 a year. The beneficiary of that life insurance policy would be a spouse, but instead of giving up $7,600, they're spending $5,000 in order to provide a comparable benefit that's then going to allow their spouse, in the event of a premature passing, to draw on a tax-free death benefit and draw income from that to replace the income that they would have received from New York State. There are ways to do that, all right? But again, a lot of this really involves a planning process and is something that should be looked at before the retirement expectations or before those retirement is expected to happen, just to see if this is a viable option relative to where your finances and financial needs are and retirement income needs are over time. All right. So regardless of what happens, right, this is where if the New York State pensioner were to pass away, that beneficiary would have access to that tax-free death benefit. All right. If the beneficiary passes away, where with New York State, we couldn't make any changes to the pension option we elected, the New York State employee would now have the ability to change beneficiaries, reduce the coverage, reduce how much they're paying for that coverage, or potentially cash in the life insurance. And now they're already collecting their single life, just like the pop-up option would have allowed them. Now they're still collecting that single life benefit with no insurance premiums, so they can resume that annual income and that maximum benefit that they're entitled to. Ultimately, what this does is retains choice and flexibility over time. Our disclaimer will be that this does not necessarily work for everyone, but based on the income needs and the family planning needs and the retirement expectations, this is something that should be explored to see if it makes sense relative to the financial position that you're in. All right. So with that, the other retirement income sources that we have to be aware of. So with the New York State pension being the largest source of retirement income, it's not going to replace all of what you are used to living on during those working years. So what other sources can we expect? Now, hopefully, Social Security will eventually be another decision. What can you expect to receive? When can you start collecting? There are a number of different philosophies and schools of thought relative to when to start and how to start collecting Social Security. But this is a big, big component that complements your pension benefits over time. This is part of the decision-making process. Again, we want to make sure that we are factoring in there. Social Security is not a one-size-fits-all decision. It is very, very predicated on the individual financial or, again, family planning needs that might be there. Another consideration is the impact of inflation over the retirement years. So someone needing $75,000 retiring this year, within about 30 years, just to buy what $75,000 buys today, we would need $187,000 just to maintain that standard of living. All right. So the impact of inflation is very, very apparent in retirement planning. We want to make sure that this is something that's part of the conversation. So one way to mitigate some of the inflation risk out there is by utilizing things like 403Bs through the district. There are different ways to save in those, whether it's pre-tax or after-tax contributions. There's a number of different things that may come back into the picture as far as spousal benefits with 401Ks and other 403Bs and potentially pensions. But really what these personal savings, these personal retirement savings vehicles are used for is to bridge the income gap between the rising cost of everything around us and where the pension and Social Security benefits will fall over time. So really what we want to look at is, again, with all the volatility out there in markets, we want to make sure that we have some decisions that are made or some ideas that are at least in place as we're migrating towards those retirement years and making some of these permanent decisions. So the TRS, unfortunately, this is where we disagree a bit with the TRS methodology of how to prepare for retirement. 18 months before you retire, ask for an estimate. 12 months before retirement, make yourself aware of some of the pre-retirement issues that you might need to consider. Again, where's income going to come from? How's health insurance going to look, right? What are my spouse's benefits going to be? 8 months before retirement, review your retirement income sources. 6 months, review your retirement budget. This is a very, very condensed timeline to do proper financial planning. All right, so our recommendation here would be to make sure that you understand your benefits now. Begin exploring how all of these different decisions are going to impact you, both from an income standpoint, but also from the longevity and the survivorship side. You can make the choice to implement these different strategies when the time is right for you. All right, but there's a much higher degree of financial success the longer that we have to plan for some of these decisions. All right, so again, a lot of the decision making involves all of these different areas. So it's not just predicated around deciding what pension option you should take. It's really making sure that all of these different things complement each other. So one way that we start doing that, and just like Annika mentioned with the complementary financial profile, is starting to take a snapshot of the financial household, right? Looking at both sides of the income picture, where are we today and where can we expect to be down the road, and starting to figure out how all of these different moving parts really complement and coordinate with one another. All right. On one side of the household, again, we might have current salary and future pension benefits and 401ks and things along those lines, right? But the other side of the household may have a different picture tied to it, right? How do these two different sides of the household work to fulfill those same common goals? And then from an asset and a debt standpoint, what debts or liabilities may we be carrying into retirement that we need to plan for? How soon might they be paid off? Are there things on the horizon that we could expect to help improve our financial situation? All of these are things that, again, creating that financial profile and looking at that snapshot, we can make sure that all the things we're doing today are leading to fulfill those goals and expectations that we have down the road. So with that being said, I know there's a couple of questions here. We will open it up for some questions, but I'll leave this on the screen as well. These are the local contacts for your representatives. All right, so I urge you, by all means, in our area in Albany and Poughkeepsie, feel free to reach out to me personally, but I urge everybody to reach out and set up a complimentary meeting with your local equitable representative. There's no cost, there is no charge to go through this financial planning process. In running those pension estimates and looking at Social Security projections, there is no bill or hourly invoice or anything like that that you will receive. So at least starting to get some of the ideas on one page can help you with that decision-making process as you continue to gravitate towards those retirement years. So with that being said, again, we will open it up for some questions, but feel free to let us know individually if there are any specific or very individual questions or expectations that you'd like to go over.
Thanks very much, Greg. Yes, we do have a bunch of questions. I'll go ahead and start reading them now. First question, does that 10% change include if you change positions? For example, you are a building administrator and then move to a district position, or change districts and make the move for a significant pay increase?
It does, especially, so we've seen this happen with other administrators that may step into a superintendent position in the last 2 years or a different administrative role. Unfortunately, yeah, New York State generally doesn't care, for lack of a better way of saying it. They will just look at the final figures to help determine what are the 3 highest consecutive years that fit within the parameters of how that calculation is actually structured.
Okay, yep, and we have a couple questions about the beneficiary, whether the beneficiary has to be a spouse, and is there a reduction for the age of a beneficiary?
So the short answer is no, the beneficiary does not need to be a spouse. However, if it is not the spouse, your spouse will need to sign off that they are aware that they will not be entitled to any future income benefit from New York State. Not that we want to create any issues within a household, but usually we don't see a comfort level in having that piece of paperwork signed. So yes, there is a reduction. So if if a 60-year-old administrator has a 60-year-old spouse, and they also have a 25-year-old child, and they want to leave their pension benefit to their child, there's going to be a much, much bigger reduction in leaving the pension benefit to their child, because New York State's calculation is going to assume mortality age of that child, and that's how long they're going to assume that they're paying out that benefit for. So because they're going to be paying out a benefit for an expected very long period of time, again, that annual pension benefit would be dramatically reduced.
Okay, do you have a standard recommendation for a couple that are both New York State educators?
I wish we could say that there is a generic answer that works. Realistically, we have some clients that want to travel the world in retirement. We have some that want to sit on their back porch and enjoy lemonade, right? We have some that want to spend every single dollar that they've ever saved, and some that want to pass on as much to their children or grandchildren as they possibly can. So it really depends on what those financial goals are and what the income needs are over time. Having 2 pensions in the household is definitely a secure place to be, because again, a lot of that monthly income is going to be coming in a systematic way. But there are a lot of different ways to strategize and plan for that, depending on what those long-term needs are.
Okay, and if you could address retiring at age 52 or 53 with 30 years of service.
So you can do it. Unfortunately, New York State will not begin paying out a pension benefit until you reach a minimum of age 55. So if someone has 30 years beforehand, you do have to wait until 55 to begin receiving your pension.
Okay, and then what about retiring in the middle of the year, say December 31st?
So the 3 highest consecutive years wouldn't be an issue, because New York State will look at the 3 highest 36 months. So that wouldn't be an issue there. There's a lot of educators that end up retiring when they reach one of those milestones, and it could be partway through the year. So there's no financial impact as long as the other milestones are still met, which is again something that we just want to make sure is a way to maximize those benefits.
Okay, and if you had your highest salary, 100,000 per year at 20, and 104,000 per year at 21, and 109,000 at year 22, and then decide to go back to the classroom for the next 8 years with a salary reduction going to 50,000, is your FAS at year 30 still based on your highest years 20, 21, and 22?
That's a quick one. Yes, it is. It doesn't matter when those 3 highest years happen. New York State will use those 3 highest consecutive years in their pension calculation.
And do administrators fall under the teacher retirement?
They do. Yep. Teachers retirement system covers educators and administrators.
Okay, and then there are a few questions about contacts for New York City and Hudson Valley Regional. And if they don't see their area listed, where can they find that information?
So feel free to, if you don't see your area listed here, we tried to get all the regions, but if you don't see it, feel free to reach out to me, and we can make sure to get you in touch with your local representative.
Okay. And can you retire from New York State and then move to another state and work without limitations?
Good question. Yes, you can certainly do that. You can also retire from New York State and work in New York State as long as it's not a public government agency. You can still work without limitations. You can do that outside of New York State. On that note, one of the big benefits of the New York State pension is that as long as you are a New York State resident, you do not pay state income tax on your New York State pension. If you move out of New York State to a state with a state income tax, you will pay most likely will pay state income tax on your New York State pension benefits if you are a resident of another state income tax state.
If all of my last 3 years of service are increased by 11%, is that okay, or will there be a penalty?
There won't necessarily be a penalty, but there could be an issue with the calculation, depending on if that is because of different types of increases that were either retroactive or longevity bonuses, things along those lines. It may or may not impact, but that could be a contract question to determine how that income is increased over those last 3 years. But from New York State's rules, that would be a concern based on the first year being compared to that third year.
And whether you can retire from TRS and then work for ERS?
You can, but you are limited to earning $30,000 a year.
Okay. And will a pension be taxed if you have an out-of-state vacation residence?
It depends on what state you claim residency. So whatever state is the majority of the time spent. But we've certainly seen instances of that where it may make more sense to stay as a New York State resident in that case versus claiming outside residency. Again, depending on the other state and some of the state tax benefits there, it's definitely part of the conversation to make sure that you're not increasing the tax basis of what you're paying year over year to that other state potentially.
And then more about beneficiaries, whether you can have more than one beneficiary, and also choose just another person if you don't have a spouse or children.
Yes, you can choose whoever you'd like to be if you don't have a spouse who would not need to sign off on that. You can choose a significant other or another family member or anything like that in the event that you chose to. But you can only choose one beneficiary for those joint allowance and those pop-up options.
Okay, does the New York State retirement system offer the insurance to bridge to 100% retirement, e.g. $5,000?
They do not. No, so the benefit that the pension replacement that you have is tied to your income. So there's a 3 times salary death benefit that every administrator has tied to their New York State employment. That 3 times salary would pay out to a beneficiary in the event that someone did not make it to retirement. But the big challenge is that only the first 50,000 of that 3 times salary death benefit is tax-free. Anything above 50,000 would be taxed as ordinary income to a beneficiary. So it certainly doesn't replace the amount of long-term income that would have been received through the pension system. It does provide again, about a 1.5 to 2 years of income replacement in the event that an administrator did not make it to retirement.
If my current position will end when I'm age 61 and I have less than 30 years, what are the pros and cons of putting off submitting for TRS retirement and trying to get another job for a year, even if that job may have a much lower income?
So that would be part of an individual conversation. That would definitely be a necessity to look at the pension factors, to look at the calculation and say, does it make sense to get another position for that year? At 61, it's a smaller reduction. So if there's other income sources or personal savings or anything like that that could be utilized. Definitely can't say one way or the other, but it could make sense to collect. It could make sense to try and find another position for one more year just to maximize those benefits.
For my service credit, I have a certain amount of years, but 7 months. How do they calculate months? In other words, how much do I have to work to round the 7 months up to a year?
So the months actually are included on their own. So most administrators will see that they have 20 years and 3 months, or 28 years and 4 months, or whatever it might be, and that's really just based on when you started in the system. So in the event that you wanted to retire as soon as you hit 30 years, that goes back to the other question of, is there a penalty or anything for retiring mid-year? And there's not. So you just want to make sure that you're reaching those milestones of 30 years in at least age 55, or staying until age 62. If you were to retire at 62 without a penalty, and you were to have 24 years and 10 months, all of those months will still be included in that pension benefit. So you don't need to necessarily retire with an even number of years.
And whether you can leave before retirement age with only 20 years and still get the retirement at age 55.
Whether you can leave retirement. Sorry, can you repeat that one more time, Erica?
Yeah, can you leave before retirement age with only 20 years of service and still get retirement at age 55? So still get the benefits, I think.
Yes, you can. Yep. The earliest anybody can collect their pension benefit under Tier 4 is age 55. It would just reduce the amount of how much you would receive year over year if you didn't have the total years of service and some of the other parameters. But yes, you can do that. You could work from 25 to age 40 and say, I'm going to go get another position. I have 15 years in with New York State. You can still collect your pension benefit off of those 15 years of service, but again, it would be a reduced amount.
Okay, and then whether longevity payments count as salary toward FAS?
So it depends on the contract, how it's written in there. We've seen it work both ways, with longevity bonuses being tied to the final average salary, but we've also seen it where it doesn't necessarily become included in that calculation. So again, going back to one of the previous questions, that could either help or hurt whether someone stays within that 10% increase year over year, or whether someone does not. So it is more of a contract wording question to determine how that's going to impact the pension benefit.
If you leave New York City TRS into the New York State pension system and transfer your time over, are you required to roll your TDA funds over into a New York State account, or can you leave it as New York City TDA until you retire?
You can leave it in a New York City TDA, depending on, again, the financial needs and the income needs and everything there. You can convert it to a 403B program through the new district, but you also can leave that TDA with the previous New York City district.
If you have 25 years of service at the age of 55, is there any other options to working until age 60 and having the 30 years?
You can certainly stay in New York State service. The service does not need to remain with TRS. It doesn't need to remain in the current role or the current position that you're in. Any years of service with New York State will continue to increase that future pension benefit.
If you bought into a 25-55 program, do you get the full benefit at 55 that you would with working 30 years?
If you bought into it, there have been early retirement incentives. There's a lot of conversation about that right now, whether a new retirement incentive will be passed. Generally, you can't, depending on the district, you generally can't buy into a 25-55 with New York State unless there is a retirement incentive that's out there. Again, that has happened before, but not anything that is concrete or confirmed as of right now that will be an option this year.
And then a couple questions on calculations. Does 20 days equal one month of service, and does 9 months equal 1 year of service?
So for a year of service, an educator needs to have 260 days within the school district for that calendar year.
Okay, and how would you know if longevity will or will not be included in FAS, and whether FAS is based on school years or fiscal years?
So that would be for, going back to the same contract question, it would depend on how it's worded in the contract, whether it's part of ordinary income or whether it's deemed a one-time bonus that's not included as a regular income payment. So depending on, again, we've seen that happen both ways. What was the second part of that one, Annika?
Whether it's based on school year or fiscal year.
So it's based on school year. So essentially, reaching the days of service milestone throughout the school year, it entitles you to a year of service. And
Okay.
look on your. Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, Annika, that if you were to look on your TRS pension profile, that's usually sent out in around July every year. That will actually illustrate all of the years of service with different districts and all of the months and some of the miscellaneous time that you may have had with substitute teaching or working as an adolescent in a park system or anything along those lines. So that should include all of those years of service. If it doesn't, there are ways to buy back years of service that you can actually include those in your total calculation. And it's generally better to do that earlier in the course of the working years to buy back those years of service versus waiting until retirement to do it. But one way or the other, it does make a positive impact in your future pension benefit.
Okay, and then if you have a greater than 10% increase in a single year, will that be capped at 10%?
That's up to the district. District contracts don't typically take into consideration that. They will compensate you based on whatever that contract says. But again, that's where retroactive increases don't necessarily factor into that 10% because it was compensation that is kind of backfilled or back owed. But again, that's where, especially one of the big things that we help our SANES members with are contract negotiations. It's something that you want to be aware of to make sure that you're not detrimentally impacting what your future pension benefit will be by getting a raise that's outside of the scope of the 10%.
If longevity is paid annually as part of regular paychecks, is that likely to be included in the FAS?
Yes, in that case, it would be likely that it is included in the FAS.
And what happens if your profile is showing the incorrect salary?
So that would definitely be something that would be a reporting issue between the district and the pension system. That salary may be based on the year previous. So it usually it's a year behind, right? So the estimates that are going to come out, well, I should say that came out last year will reflect last year's income, but a lot of times what your raises are going to be and what your step increases or anything like that might be with the district. So so the reporting is typically a year behind where your actual income expectations are. So that could be the issue, but again, you want to make sure that the reporting between the district and New York State is also accurate.
And how would a second position, e.g. alternative high school principal, impact the final average salary?
It shouldn't impact anything because still New York State's going to look at the total income over the course of the working years, and they're going to then factor in those 3 highest consecutive years. So regardless of where the income is coming from or what position or role it's coming through, it should be included into your final average salary.
And then I think we have one last question, and I believe that you had already answered it, but they just would like clarification whether FAS is based on school years or fiscal years and not credit of years.
So the final average salary is going to be based on the credited years of service. So with the school district calculation, it is typically based on the school year where you get your service credit. But that service credit will all go into the final average salary calculation to determine what you're eligible for. So the school years are on the school year calendar to determine how much service credit you're earning year over year.
Okay, great. It looks like we don't have any more questions, so we can wrap it up. As we mentioned, that the recording will be available at saneys.org within the next day or so. And I don't believe we have any more questions. So if you'd like any more information, you can also go to the Saneys website to contact your local equitable representative. And thanks again, Greg. Appreciate it, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks so much.